And joining me is Senator Tom Cotton. Senator, thank you for being here. Let's begin with one of the big international affairs stories of this past week. $400 million cash payment to Iran. Tell me what's your biggest concern about this?
Well, the $400 million payment was a ransom payment for American hostages, and it was straight cash. It wasn't a wire transfer, it wasn't a check. It was cash that was flown in the dark of night and given to the Ayatollahs. And I say that it was a ransom payment because whatever the president and senior administration officials claim, it was done.
Which is that it wasn't a ransom payment.
But it was done simultaneously with the exchange of hostages. More important, it's not what the president says, it's what the Ayatollahs think. And they have said explicitly that they viewed it as a ransom payment, that they would not have released those hostages without that $400 million ransom. The reason why we don't negotiate with terrorists, why we don't pay ransoms for hostages, is because it only creates an incentive to take more hostages. And that's exactly what Iran has done since then.
This $400 million payment, though, this is not new news other than that it was the cash transaction. Back in January, this story was out there. It was reported widely. You commented on it. Quite a few people did. The reason that the administration says that $400 million was given was for money that was transferred in 1979 before the fall of the Shah. What's your new concern about this? Is there something new in this story that concerns you? Because you've already expressed your dissatisfaction with the previous answer.
Well, back in January, I said that this was a ransom payment. And I think it's a coincidence that not many Arkansans would believe that after 36 years of legal dispute about this money, they just happened to resolve it the weekend that those hostages were released and the weekend that the nuclear deal was implemented. But I think it is deeply worrying that we gave straight cash to the Ayatollahs.
Why would they do that? Do you think?
Why do drug dealers and drug cartels and human traffickers and criminals deal in cash? It's because they want to evade the banking system. So if this money had been transferred, it would have been easier to trace. But when you give the Ayatollahs $400 million stacked on pallets on an airplane that they can do anything with, I think it's almost inevitable, as the senior administration officials involved in this story have admitted, that it's going to find its way into the hands of Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps, the shock troops that are responsible for the deaths of Americans in Iraq and Afghanistan, or Hezbollah, or Hamas, or other terrorist organizations.
There's still $1.3 billion to be repaid on this whole transaction. At least that's what we read in a lot of the media reports. Will you insist, or can you make it happen in some sort of different transactional way?
Roby, I don't know yet whether there's $1.3 billion left. The administration has continued to dissemble and stonewall Congress on these very questions. In January, we were asking these questions. I've asked them at hearings since then. We just sent another letter to the Treasury Secretary and the Secretary of State this week, precisely because the administration will not level with the American people. In fact, they won't even say if the hostages were released before the $400 million landed in that airplane in Tehran. I suspect that means that they weren't released until the money was received. So the administration has stonewalled these questions all along, in part, I suspect, because they know just how unpopular their Iran policy is.
Do you think that the $1.7 billion that's been disputed since 1979, do you think that Iran is owed that money?
I certainly don't think they're owed all of that money. The administration went above and beyond the traditional norms of international dispute settlements to pay for interest and for inflation. Again, I believe because the Ayatollahs were demanding that in exchange for the release of those hostages, which President Obama wanted to achieve before the nuclear deal was implemented.
Let's shift gears and talk about another issue that's been dominating. It's more domestic here. We learned earlier this week that Aetna, one of the largest health insurers in the country, is going to drop out of several of the Affordable Care Act exchanges here. They said that one of the reasons they're getting out is that people were sicker than they thought they would be. Diabetes, a variety of different illnesses. I'll just name a few of them from their conversation: depression, hypertension, heart disease, hepatitis C. What should be the fate of people that can't get health insurance that have those problems?
Well, unfortunately, this is just another confirmation of what we've been saying about Obamacare all along, that it's unworkable, that it's fundamentally flawed. Aetna is now dropping out. Previously, United dropped out. We've seen in the news this week that we're going to see double-digit increases in premiums in some plans. In the end, Obamacare has to be repealed, it has to be replaced. In the meantime, though, we need to make sure that we protect those families who can no longer afford health insurance because Obamacare has made it unaffordable.
How do you do that, though?
So
how do you protect them?
So Obamacare imposes a penalty on families that can't afford insurance, and it's pretty steep. It goes up every year, and this year it's going to be 2.5% of your income, or it's going to be $700 for every adult in your family, $350 for every child, whichever is greater, not whichever is lower, but whichever is greater. So I've introduced legislation that would block any family from having to pay that penalty if their insurance or the average cost of insurance in their state has increased by more than 10%. That's not a long-term fix,
Right.
but is a short-term fix to make sure that families who have suffered the problem of losing their health insurance because Obamacare made it too expensive from having to pay a penalty because of what Obamacare did to them.
So what is the long-term solution? Because I've heard the repeal and replace argument for years, quite frankly, and there has been the effort to repeal. It got to the president's desk. It was vetoed, I believe. And so I still haven't seen legislation to replace it yet. A lot of talk, but no legislation.
Too often in Washington in the healthcare debate, and this was true of Obamacare in 2009 and 10, cost and access are put in opposition to each other. To me, cost means access. If you can make health insurance more affordable, you don't have to force people to buy it. You don't have to put mandates on people. You don't have to penalize them for not having it. People want health insurance. They want to make sure that they get covered, and especially that their children get covered. In the long term, we have to use the same principles of market-based competition that you see in the car insurance market or the home insurance market or any other market to encourage more competition, to allow patients and to allow families to make the choices that are right for them, given their circumstances in life, given how much they can afford to pay for health insurance, given the likelihood that they're going to have health problems. That's what we have to do in the long term.
When are you going to introduce a bill to make that happen is my question.
Well, I'm right now focused on the most immediate problems with Obamacare. It's going to be hard to repeal Obamacare as long as the namesake of the legislation remains president. We've known that for the last year and a half. As you say, we passed an Obamacare repeal bill earlier this year, and the president vetoed it. But hopefully, in a new president, in a new presidency with a new Congress, we can repeal Obamacare and we can replace it with health insurance reform that works for all Americans.
What would be wrong with hanging out the ideas or a piece of legislation that you say this is what we would change it to? That would make it pretty clear and obvious for a lot of folks to say, I could get behind that. I could support that if what you're saying is true.
A lot of those ideas I've already proposed, and a lot of my colleagues in the Congress have proposed as well.
I can't find a bill for that, though. I'm looking for the piece of legislation.
Well, it's one thing to say that you're going to write an entire bill when you know that bill is not going to pass. But to lay out the general principles.
Happens all the time in Congress. Come on.
But on something as healthcare is a central question of our day. It's not just a question for our families. It's a question of our budget deficits. If you look at what state government and federal government spends an increasing portion of its money on, it's healthcare programs, whether it's Medicare, Medicaid, veterans health care, and so forth. If we get health care reform correct, it's not just good for our families, but it's good for taxpayers. I'm open to lots of different ideas. There are some basic principles that I would like to see implemented, though, and those principles revolve around giving individuals more choice and therefore more control over their health insurance. I think it'll lower prices for everyone, which means it's going to increase access for everyone.
I want you to be back on the show when you introduce the legislation. You promised me that I'll get that first.
I'll do that.
All right, I appreciate that. All right, let's shift gears and talk about just some pure politics here. A week, quite frankly, an hour does not go by without Donald Trump making some sort of headline here and there. A few of them this week. He's fought with a slain soldier's family. You've commented on that. He's questioned NATO. He's offered praise to Russian leaders. He's claimed that the elections are going to be rigged. He's not endorsed John McCain or Paul Ryan. Is the Donald Trump campaign going in the right direction in your estimation?
Well, just based on that litany of stories, it's not. Here's what we should have focused on in the last week. Last Friday, we had a new economic growth report that confirmed that the Obama-era economy will be the weakest economy since World War II. On Sunday, Hillary Clinton lied about the lies that she told about her email server. And on Tuesday, we learned that the Obama administration had paid $400 million in ransom for hostages. Those are the issues that should be driving the debates in the presidential campaign and in Senate races all around the country. And Donald Trump would be well advised to get back to the issues that Americans actually care about, not going off on tangents and offending some of the people who have sacrificed the most for this country.
Why do you think it is not staying focused on those issues?
It's a good question. Donald's an unconventional candidate in an unconventional year. But what most Arkansans care about, based on my travels around the state, based on my last two campaigns, is how much money they're taking home in their paycheck at the end of the week, whether or not they're going to get a raise, whether they can afford their mortgage and groceries and their kids' education, whether they're safe on their streets, and whether our country is safe and respected in the world. That's where any candidate should be focused, because that's what voters want to hear about.
Right, but that is not where the conversation is right now. And it's because Donald Trump is not taking the conversation in that direction. Is he too much of a wild card to trust in terms of those important issues that you're talking about that he's not talking about.
Well, I'm confident that with a Republican president and Republican Congress, America will be safer and more prosperous. You know, we just talked about health care for a while. We passed an Obamacare repeal bill earlier this year. President Obama vetoed it. Donald Trump would sign it, Hillary Clinton would veto it. And you can go down a whole host of issues, whether it's immigration or defense spending or the Supreme Court or nominations to executive branch agencies like the EPA, in which America will be better off with a Republican president and Republican Congress. But Donald Trump and Republican candidates across America have to make that case. And going on the tangents we've seen in the last week is simply not going to do that.
You're still endorsing Donald Trump, though?
I still believe that Donald Trump with a Republican Congress would be best for America.
Are you proud that he's your party's nominee? Fair question.
I believe that he's, of the candidates that we have, who we have a choice between, that Donald Trump is the best choice, along with a Republican Congress, to keep this country safe and to make us more prosperous.
Is there anything that Donald Trump could do that would cause you to not necessarily endorse or vote for Hillary Clinton, but to lose your endorsement, to lose his endorsement?
Well, you know, I've had a lot of disagreements with Donald Trump. I've disagreed with him on the merits of issues, like some of the statements he's made about NATO or our alliances with South Korea and Japan. I've disagreed with some of his style, some of the comments he's made over the last week. But in the end, I think the country would be safer and more prosperous if Donald Trump was the president, Republicans are elected to Congress.
Just playing devil's advocate with you a little bit here, and this will be my last point on this, but I mean, it seems like you're saying to me, and I don't want to falsely interpret this, you would rather dance with the devil you don't know than the devil you do know in Hillary Clinton. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, I wouldn't use that language because I don't want to imply that either Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton are devils.
One of them's called one of them a devil, I think. So, but okay, fair enough.
But you know, I have my disagreements with Donald Trump. I have many more disagreements with Hillary Clinton, and I know that Donald Trump can be unpredictable. And like I said, I disagree with some policies that he's proposed. If he's elected, I'll work in Congress to change his mind or to stop those policies if I can't. But I know with Hillary Clinton exactly what we're going to get. We're going to get more of the failures of the last 8 years.
All right. Senator Tom Cotton, always good to sit down with you. Thank you so much for being here.
Good to be with you.
All right. Back with more right after this.